All right, I'm Randall Castleton. Today we're going to talk about addition and subtraction of integers. First, we'll start with addition of integers. First of all, you want to think of an integer as a whole number. We don't have to worry about fractions or decimals, all right? So when we're talking about addition, you want to think about the sum or total of two or more numbers. Well, we'll call them integers again, all right? So when we're talking about that, we want to talk about the sum or total of two or more numbers. Now, first thing you want to talk about is what if we have numbers that are same sign? If you wanted to add numbers with the same sign. All right. For example, what if you had to do 9 plus 5? Those are everyday, ordinary things. Like if you take $9 plus $5, you're going to get $14, right? Don't even think twice about adding that. You're just going to add them up and say, if I have 9 plus 5, I've got $14 or whatever item you might have, right? But what if we added up a couple of negatives, such as -8 plus -4? Those might not make as much sense, all right? If you're talking about money, you obviously owe somebody $8, and then you owe them $4 more, so you owe them $12. So what you might want to do to help you out, it wouldn't help you out as much on this one, but it will on this one, is you might want to think about taking the absolute value of each of these numbers before you add them. So if you take the absolute value of -8, remember when you're talking about absolute value, you're talking about the distance of that number from 0, all right? How many units, how many tick marks is that number you have from 0? So if you're talking about the absolute value of -8, that would be 8. The absolute value of -4 would be 4, because -4 is 4 units from 0. Since these numbers have the same sign, now you'd want to add them up. So if I add up 8 plus 4, you get 12. What you've got to do now, though, is that since you were adding the absolute value of -8 and -4, since the numbers were both negative, you've got to go in there and make your answer negative, because the sum of two negative integers would have to be a negative integer. So what you might want to do when you're adding numbers with the same sign is, first of all, take their absolute value. Secondly, you would want to add them up. And then last thing, you'd want to attach the sign that you began with. Okay? So again, use the idea of absolute value. Some people use number lines. If you want to use number lines, that will help too. But if you use absolute value, number lines get difficult when numbers get huge. So if you can think in terms of taking the absolute value of a number to help you do those. Here's another example. What if you had to do -12 plus -14? If we had to add those two. Again, what you're going to do first is do absolute values over the side. The absolute value of -12 would be 12. The absolute value of -14 would be 14. -12 is 12 units from 0. -14 is 14 units from 0. So to get their absolute value, you've got 12 and 14. So then we want to add them up because they have the same sign. So 12 plus 14, 2 and 4 would be 6, 1 and 1 would be 2. So we would add them up and get a 26, but then you got to go back and remember you were adding two negative numbers. So the answer, therefore, must be negative. So you're going to make it -26. All right. Now let's change pace a little bit and talk about adding numbers with the different sign. So for example, what if you were going to add a couple of numbers such as -8 plus 6, all right? This is where people tend to get confused when you start combining negatives and positives, all right? We can use the same idea. We want to talk about absolute value. We could say, hey, what's the absolute value of -8? That would be 8. The absolute value of 6 would be 6. Again, since 6 is 6 units from 0. Now, what you'd want to do here, though, since these numbers are opposite signs, instead of adding them, you're going to subtract them. And you always want to take your bigger number minus your smaller number. If I do 8 minus 6, I'm going to get a value of 2. All right? So we took their absolute values and we subtracted them since they had an opposite sign. And now what you got to do is you got to go attach the sign of the number that had the greater absolute value. -8's absolute value was 8. 6 only had an absolute value of 6. So we had more negatives at the beginning. The -1 had the greater absolute value, so therefore our answer must be negative. So if we're going to add -8 plus 6, we're going to get -2. All right? So again, when you're doing integers, when you're going to add numbers with different signs, or we'll call them opposite signs, again, you want to take their absolute value first, but what you're going to want to do this time is you're going to want to subtract the numbers. Well, we'll say subtract the integers here. And then you want to attach the sign of the number with a greater absolute value. Okay? So again, if you're adding numbers with opposite signs, take their absolute value, subtract the larger minus the smaller, and then attach the sign of the number with a greater absolute value. For example, one more example. What if we had to add 21 plus negative 6? All right? One way to think of it is almost like saying 21 minus 6. All right? But if you didn't know that, you could go over here and you could say the absolute value of 21 would be 21. The absolute value of negative 6 just means that negative 6 is 6 units for 0. Since you had opposite signs at the beginning, you want to subtract. 21 minus 6 would be 15. So we've got a value of 15, and then you go back. Which number had the greater absolute value? 21 did. It's a positive integer. Therefore, our answer must be positive. Okay? All right, so now how about a little subtraction of integers? So if you're subtracting integers, you're going to find the difference between two integers. So again, you're finding a difference. Between two integers. All right. A common example would be something like this, 7 minus 2. Most people won't have too much trouble with that, but if you do 7 minus 2, you're going to think the answer is 5. That's something we do every day. If you go to the store, you have $7, you spend $2, you got $5 left, right? What most people don't realize is that if you wanted to, you could change any subtraction problem to an addition problem. 7 minus positive 2 would be the equivalent of 7 plus a negative 2. I can change subtraction to addition, but if you do that, you must change the sign of the number you are subtracting. So in other words, to subtract 2 is the same as adding negative 2. So you could also put up here as a little reminder, to subtract a number is the same as adding its opposite. All right? Doesn't do us much good in a problem like this, right? 7 minus 2 is probably much easier than doing 7 plus negative 2. But what if we had a little problem such as this? What if you were asked, let's rewrite this. What if we were asked to subtract negative 3 minus 18? All right, that's not something we think of every day when you think of negative 3 minus 18. If you think in terms of money, it looks like you owe somebody $3 right now, and then you went and you borrowed 18 more. So you're trying to figure out how much you owe them. So what you could do here to make things a little more workable is you could say, this is the same as saying negative 3. If I change subtraction to addition, I've got to change right now. This is a positive 18, so that would be the same as doing negative 3 plus negative 18. And we just talked about addition, so now we can just go back to help you add them. You could take their absolute values. Absolute value of negative 3 would be 3. Absolute value of negative 18 would be 18. So if I add 3 and 18, you get 21. But if we're adding two negative numbers, the solution or the answer must be a negative, so it must be negative 21, all right? Let's try one more subtraction just to make sure you get the hang of it. So what if we had to subtract 21 minus a negative 17? Again, that is not a normal everyday thing you talk about when you're out and about, doing 21 minus negative 17. So it might be say, hey, to subtract negative 17 would be the same as adding positive 17. Subtraction becomes addition. Negative 17 really became positive 17. 21 plus 17 is something we would add every day. You can do absolute values again if you want to. You know, the absolute value of 21 would be 21. The absolute value of 17 would be 17. But if you add those up, you're going to get 38. Since both answers were positive, our answer therefore must be positive. All right? So that ends the segment on addition and subtraction of integers. Our next segment will be on the multiplication and division of integers.